I missed a few beat 'em ups when I was compiling lists for the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and Nintendo Entertainment System. I've covered a few of those already, but I wanted to come back to this one, which is Captain Commando. This was released by Capcom in the arcades in 1991, and like a few of their other beat 'em ups on the Super Nintendo, got ported over a few years later. I'm sure there's more of a story as to why it took Capcom 4 years to port this game to the Super Nintendo, but yeah, whatever. They also never brought these over to the Sega Genesis, so we didn't get Captain Commando or Knights of the Round or King of the Dragons over on the Sega Genesis. It is what it is. You can play all of these games, at least their arcade ports, on the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, and that's probably the best way to play them because you don't have to spend so much money on these cartridges. I don't think they're really worth it, especially when you have them all put together on a bundle where you can get them on a modern system. And you have online multiplayer and all that other stuff. Anyway, let's get into this one and just see what the Super Nintendo port has to offer and how good it is. So there is a story in Captain Commando. It's pretty much what you would expect. It takes place in a futuristic version of Metro City, where, the setting for Capcom's other beat 'em up franchises take place, specifically Final Fight. I don't know how many Capcom games have callbacks to the Final Fight and Street Fighter series, but it's pretty amazing. I just love the fact that this is all taking place in that city. Like, everything Mayor Mike Hagar did just completely was for naught, and now you've got a different group of people who are trying to save this city from whoever, just some weird evil group of people. So the year is now 2026 in the game. The world is filled with crime. We have 4 heroes who are going to try to eliminate all crime on Earth, and apparently the rest of the galaxy. Seems like a tall order for them, but hey, they're going to take the Mayor Mike Hagar approach because it seemed to work for Metro City so well that these people are going to do it again. I mean, we don't get a sequel to this, so I'm guessing it worked. So, who are you fighting in this game? Well, you're fighting a bunch of criminals who happen to have been given evil superpowers. I don't know. These are criminals that are known as the super criminals and are led by an alien who is known as Scumocide. In Japan, he was known as Genocide, and I think that's probably, what he should have been called. I get Nintendo needed to change it to try to make it more family friendly, but it's a game where you're wandering around beating people up. I don't know why they would need to do that, but that's what they decide to do. Anyway, the story gets the job done. You don't need anything elaborate here, just you need to know who the bad guys are, why you're beating them up, and that's pretty much it. There's a little backstory given to just who these characters are, like the baby who happens to have all the mannerisms of Mike Hagar. I'm sorry, I just really love that. It's a little baby riding a mech, and he has all of the moves of Mayor Mike Hagar. It's amazing. Anyway, that's the story. It's nothing special, nothing really unique, but hey, it tells you what you need to know, and that's really all it has to do. The gameplay is very good. Captain Commando has great controls, and it sticks to a familiar style of combat that works really well in the arcades and translated very well to the Super Nintendo. You've got several stages, each of those end with a boss. It's everything you would expect from a 1990s beat 'em up. It breaks from tradition a little bit by having 4 playable characters. One of them is absolutely amazing, and it's really the only reason this game stood out for me. But the 4 characters are Captain Commando. He's your generic video game hero, really not all that special. Then you've got Mac the Knife. He's a space mummy who fights with 2 daggers. He's supposed to be an alien. Looks like a mummy to me. That's Mac the Knife. And then there's Ginzu the Ninja. He's a ninja. He fights with a sword. There's really nothing I can say about him. And then Babyhead. He is a baby riding a mech. This is the most video game thing that I have seen so far in one of these games. It's just awesome. I love the fact that this little child is an infant, I think it's like 2 years old or something, it somehow is a super genius, developed this mech for it to ride around in, and it fights crime with it. I don't understand what's going on with that, and I don't care. It's just awesome. I'm pretty sure this was designed using the Final Fight engine just because of some of the mannerisms and the moves for a few of the characters, and also a couple of the sprites for the enemies. It just feels like they got recycled from Final Fight, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like pretty much every beat 'em up, you find weapons and food during the stages. They're pretty standard. The game gives you 5 continues. What's a little weird is the continues only have 2 lives, and it's not really shown where your lives are on the screen, so that's kind of crappy, but whatever. I do like the gameplay in Captain Commando a lot. It delivered exactly what I was expecting it to. It's a pretty solid game. I just would get it on the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle and not really go and look for the cartridge on the Super Nintendo unless you really want to collect all of these. Captain Commando looks very good. The characters and enemy sprites look great. The stages look really good. While it isn't as good looking as the arcade version, it does look really good for an SNES game. Each of the 4 main characters, I think, looks great. They stand out from the other main characters from the different beat-em-ups that I've played, especially Babyhead and Mac the Knife. Those 2 are probably the best looking out of the 4. The others just feel a little bit more generic. It is very funny that Babyhead shares the same animations as Mike Hagar. I understand wanting to reuse them, but putting them on a character like that just really makes it kind of funny. And it made me think back to just all the other characters that seem to be based on Mike Hagar, or Zangief. He also gets lumped in with the same kind of animations and everything. There are the usual palette swaps for like the stage enemies and bosses. I never thought that this was really that big of a deal, especially when I was little. It just never even occurred to me. When I get older, I kind of see it more now. The enemies get reused quite a bit in games like this. It isn't a huge problem, but it would be nicer if like each stage had their own kind of unique characters to it. That would have made it feel just a little bit different. You do get a few new ones introduced, but for the most part, seeing those palette swaps now is more of a problem than it would have been way back in the 90s. You can tell that this game was really based off of Final Fight. It has the same idea to it. You're going through these different stages. Some of the stages kind of look similar to Final Fight. And yeah, there's a lot of similarities to it. That's why I think they either used the same engine or at least modified it so it would look a little bit different. I don't know whether it was the first Final Fight's engine or the second, but it feels like they just reused it. That's not a bad thing. It's just one of those things you notice when you've played a whole bunch of these beat-em-ups in a row. And yeah, I think they still did a very good job with it, and at least tried to make it look a little bit different from its source material. Overall, it's a pretty good beat-em-up. It looks pretty great. It is a little strange that Capcom waited so long to put this on the Super Nintendo, but I don't think the graphics were really hurt by it. It looks very good for a Super Nintendo game. While Captain Commando isn't as good as, say, Final Fight 2 or Knights of the Round or King of the Dragons, it's still a very good game. The controls are great, the graphics are very good, it's just a wonderful game overall. It probably should have been ported to the SNES earlier. It's just kind of weird that they waited until 95 to do that, but I don't know, maybe there were some other issues that Capcom had where they just couldn't port this and Knights of the Round and the King of the Dragons over as soon as they could. It's just a little odd. I would put Captain Commando in the same group as like the Russian Beat series. So it's right up there with like Rival Turf, Project Justice, and Brawl Brothers, those games. It does have a better story than those, but that's just because their story got stripped out of them. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.